Oh, why are you talking? That's weird. Okay.
Huh.
I guess that's so weird. It must be a new privacy setting.
No, yeah.
Privacy settings. We are getting recorded.
We're getting recorded. Excellent.
It's okay. All right. We should
All
get
right.
started. Sorry. I'm a little behind on the
You're only half on the screen, I think.
Oh, all right. I'll come back.
There we go.
Yeah.
How's that?
Good.
There are two of us, not one and a half.
All right. I have to see the chat. I have to. All right.
Sarah's only partially committed tonight.
Yeah, there's a lot you could do with that. I'll just let it go. Hello. I feel like it's been a long time because we skipped last month.
Yeah, I know.
So I think we should have a vote at the end whether we should have to come back or we should just leave it to Melissa and Christina to do all future. I heard that was the best one yet. I mean, that's all I'm saying. So whatever.
Right,
but while we're at it,
throw the gauntlet down.
We gotta
do something here.
We got up our game.
All right, so we're talking about New World,
New World, Old
and
World.
Old World wines today. So cool. Let's see. Let's start with the New World versus Old World being a really kind of bad way to describe it, huh? Because at least to me, it's really about dry areas and wet areas, and those are kind of New World, Old World, in that a lot of the newer wine regions, Australia, California, South America, are mostly dry, and the Old World regions, France, Italy, Spain, or parts of Spain anyway, are Germany, Austria, are more rainy. So, but there are parts of Spain and parts of Italy, and certainly lots of Greece and other Southern Europe, Turkey, places like that have huge long histories of making wine that are very dry, and they tend to make some wines that are more, it can almost be more similar to an Australian wine than
what we think of as New
World. What we think of as the Old World wine. So, yeah. So anyway, I guess we should go back and start.
Should we start with what we're drinking?
What we're drinking and what we're actually trying to describe. So,
right. Okay.
Hey.
I know. I kind of.
Somebody opened it already.
I opened it already. Because it's hard to open.
We are drinking an unlabeled wine. Look at that.
Surprise. So this is not necessarily, we had to kind of think, because we wanted to drink rosé, how we could work rosé into the Old World, New World conversation. Yeah. But we have a plan.
I have a plan.
Because we're very devious that way. So we're drinking our rosé just because it felt like a rosé day. Cheers. Yeah. I know a lot of folks, I think Lynn and Bill have it too, right? I think I see a few others out there. Maybe it seemed like rosé weather to us. So we can get into that.
It seems like we're rosé weather to us a lot.
Yes, through pretty much
we are
May
big fans
through,
of
yeah. So yeah. And we can talk a little more about it, but
yeah. So okay. So in the wine world, there's this, people make these distinctions, critics, other people, of New World versus Old World, and the style difference, at least what that means to me, is that a New World wine is one that is styled to taste good on its own. An Old World wine is styled to taste good with food. And there's a big overlap there. But if you think about like a wine that if you go to a cocktail party or something and you feel like a glass of wine and you're just standing around before dinner, that's the New World style works really well there. If you've tried like a village Italian wine or a country France wine in that setting, often will come across as way too acidic, almost sour, not very much fruit and things. And if you try an Australian or Californian, typical Chilean kind of wine, they'll be like, hey, this is good. When you eat food, your mouth changes. And so our foods tend to be acidic, and that kind of shuts down your acidic receptors in your mouth and makes them less sensitive. So now that village Italian wine that tasted so sort of sour on its own, with the food, all of a sudden tastes beautifully balanced. Mm-hmm. The New World wines kind of go the opposite way. They might be balanced without the food, but as soon as your acidic receptors start to shut down, they start to taste a little flat. And so, to me, there's a real distinction there of what kind of wine are you trying to make. And there are It's really hard, but you can make a wine that straddles both of those.
Sure, yeah.
That tastes good on its own. It's maybe a little fresh, as the French would say. Acidic is the
Right.
real, but still it's okay on its own, and then does really well with the food as well. But it's hard, and so yeah. Another distinction that is often made of those two, New World versus Old World, is that New World's wines are wines of the sun. They come from regions that are, it's not just that it doesn't rain, it's very sunny
and hot and often dry.
And
I mean,
so,
dry, not just not raining, but not humid either. And it does make a difference in what it does to the dries out the grapes. It makes the grapes smaller often.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that. Because it makes a real difference, the amount of sun and heat and things it gets. But one of the things it does is kind of it makes, like, soil is less important in places where it doesn't rain. You can have wines from different soils, and they're very similar. They're going to still be different, but not all that different. If you're in a rainy region with those same two soils, those wines are going to be very different, because soil has so much to do with how the vine gets water or doesn't get water. So
there's
that it really makes a difference.
Yeah, there's a whole wine saying or thought that the humidity or rainfall give you wines of terroir. You hear a lot about terroir, so where they're more likely to express the soil, and sunnier, drier, non-rain regions give you varietal character. So if you want Cabernet Sauvignon to stand out as Cabernet Sauvignon, that tastes not necessarily exactly the same, but similar vineyard to vineyard to vineyard, you're going to see that much more in a dry place. If you want to have Cabernet Sauvignon express itself differently, as we the wine geeks like to think of it, then you want a place where it can interact more with the soil. And a lot of that soil interaction happens when there's rainfall, because it pulls minerals out of the soil. It's going to just have a bigger impact on the wine. So in our minds, there's kind of those two things, and that's a lot of this, why we think of dry and I won't call us a wet climate, but I don't know, not dry, which I guess is wet. It's not dry. Anyway, not dry. That's a lot. That's kind of one of the major differences in terms of what you're going to get. Continue.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, it's well put. And maybe we should talk some, because we're the winemakers, about some of the differences in farming and winemaking that you find in a place like California, or that's the one we know best. So we'll talk about that.
West Coast, US.
West Coast. Yeah, right. Washington State is very similar. Oregon is a little different, but kind of similar as well. So,
so one footnote on Washington State, which everybody may know, but I personally think of Washington State as a rainy place, because I think of the coast, but the actual Rhine region is on the other side of the mountains, I guess. And there's basically a desert there. Yeah. I mean, so it is a very, very dry growing climate. The wine region of Washington State is also very dry, which took me a while to figure that out, because I kept thinking it should be. I think of Seattle and the most rainy cities and all that, but that's not where they grow the wine.
Yeah.
So
in fact, it's it's really even drier. What happens in Washington State? Most of that place around Woodinville and where all the wine is grown, it gets somewhere between 6 and 12 inches of rain a year.
Really
we get about 40. So they get very little rain. It's really a desert. The Northern California, most of the California wine regions actually I think Napa gets close to the same amount that we get. It just all comes in the winter.
Right.
So it stops raining in May, and it does not reliably rain again until November 1st, usually. And then they get a lot of rain.
They get a lot of rain, right.
Whole winter, and then again. So that also makes differences.
Right. No, it's true. If you think about all the animals and with undergrowth and cover crops and all kinds of stuff, it makes a huge difference in how they grow. Yeah.
So in the vineyard, let's see. So one of the things, just step back a minute, one of the first things we realized when we did our around the world trip, talking to winemakers and wine growers all over Europe and then California, and we went to visit wineries in South America and Australia and all sorts of places, and then the East Coast. One thing we realized by talking to all those people is we had to mostly focus on the advice from the old world, not because people in California or the West Coast or any of the hotter, drier regions were worse wine growers by any means, but they just had different challenges. And
Yes,
so
very, very
when we
different, right?
talk to them, the things they face are not the things that we face. We're much more similar to the climate in much of France or in Germany, Austria, northwestern Spain, and places like that than we are to California. So in the vineyard, so in California, what they're trying to do is preserve water, for one. So you find a lot of the vineyards are planted with vines further apart than we do, and the reason why we have this, we get 2,000 vines an acre. Some places in France are 4,000. We haven't gone there yet. I don't think we're going to.
It's an equipment issue
a
more
bit
than
of- yeah,
anything else.
It's a bit of a nightmare, but turns out that having that many more leaves and that much more canopy uses more water. The vines are perspiring. I guess they call it respiring for them.
Inspiring, yeah.
But their water is or transpiring. I can never figure it out. One of the spirings, and they're so water is coming out all the time. You can think of them as little pumps. They're pumping water out of the ground, and so for us, we want to pump that water out of the ground. We want drier. So the more vines, the more they use, the quicker they get to water stress. Water stress is what gets them to work on their grapes instead of keep growing leaves and shoots all year. So that's all good for us. In a place like California, water stress just comes naturally because it doesn't rain. They're actually irrigating. If you go to not all of them, but if you go to, take a wine, get a master's in wine in enology at University of California, Davis, which is the biggest wine school in the U.S., about half the curriculum is irrigation. It is how to irrigate correctly, how to manage water, how to things that just don't apply to us.
Right. There is crazy science that goes into putting these like water bombs, they call them, underground and measuring what the soil, moisture levels are like and when you need to irrigate and for how long. I mean, none of it is, none of it's relevant. I used to read all this stuff and then I was like, I do not need to know this. I do not need to understand a pressure bomb because I will never get to decide how much water my plants get. So we have different things that we think about to cover that.
So they face that. They also face just a ton of sun and heat. You would think that helps the vines the grapes get riper. But turns out it doesn't really. You need enough heat and sun to get your grapes ripe. But mostly what that does is create more sugar in the grapes. And so when we talk about ripeness of a grape, we're trying to simultaneously get get a good enough sugar to get a good alcohol level. For us, it would be great if it's 13 and a half for the reds, maybe 12 and a half for the whites, something like that. That's a really nice balanced amount of alcohol. We're going to get back to alcohol in a few minutes. You want that to happen. So that's about 23% sugar, something like that would be really nice. You want that to happen at the same time that the seeds turn brown and the skins are nice and chewy and kind of not very astringent and start to fall apart. And the acidity is still high enough, because the acidity drops as the grapes get riper. You still want it high enough that you have a fresh wine instead of a flat wine. It's impossible to get all those things to happen at once.
And kind of the greenness of the berry goes away. And I feel like that's a big issue where you can have these wines that are very ripe. They're very high sugar, but they don't taste ripe yet. And it can be a trick. And that is a challenge of hot climates. It's why you end up seeing often from these new world climates or new world wines, much higher alcohols because they have to wait until the sugars get a lot higher till they get these funky flavors. Sometime in the beginning of August, we'll do a what the grapes taste like green tasting. Or you call that, well, the berries, I mean, maybe not. But I mean, the grapes, when the grapes first start, when they get about this big and they start to look like a grape, they taste like a peppercorn. I mean, they're so kind of green. I mean, it's like you're chewing a leaf and then that has to slowly go away. The closest thing I can think of is if you eat a banana and if you eat that like that little tiny piece of peel that sometimes sticks, you know, like the little stripey thing, like if you chew that like kind of gritty, like really, that's the closest sort of normal thing that I can think of that tastes like a green grape, like a really green grape. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing, but it'll give you the idea. So to get rid of those flavors and have the seeds start to brown and all that stuff while the sugars aren't crazy is what we're trying to do.
Yep. And so you're trying to get all those things to happen at once, and you know, it's a miracle if they all do, but you got to get them close enough, and that's the time when you want to pick. In hot regions, their challenge is that the sugars go nuts, and the skins aren't ripe, the seeds aren't ripe, the flavors aren't there. What do you do? And so what's happened in the I will get to what's happened in a bit, but so that's a challenge of a vineyard in a place like California. They if you look back at like from about, usually it's about 1994 is the line they say, that before that California was making a lot of very balanced, very old world style almost wines in Napa, Sonoma, and then they started to adopt basically Bordeaux techniques. They started looking at what Bordeaux is doing and saying, oh, we should try that as well. And so one of the things you used to have is, if you notice our canopies, our vines, if you look down a row, we try to get them to look almost like a knife edge, like everything is in its place, standing up straight, nothing sticking out, and we're pulling leaves off the east side where the clusters all are, trying to get sun onto the grapes. We're trying to sort of maximize the amount of sun that the leaves get, that the grapes get. In California years ago, what they used to do, and I guess mostly just because it was the easiest thing to do, they would have a trellis system they called California sprawl.
I think that wasn't the official name. Yeah, well, it was a little derogatory, but it was what people called it.
I know it's become the name.
Huge,
sprawl. And what they would do is the rows would be further apart than ours because they didn't want to use less water, and they would just, instead of hedging and keeping everything really thin, they would sort of let it kind of sprawl, like let it kind of fall over a little bit over the top of the trellis. And the effect of that was that was pretty good, Nicole.
I like Nicole. I like the official sign for sprawl.
And but the effect of that is, if you imagine this big sprawl, it's almost like an umbrella. And in the hottest part of the day, it would shade the grapes, which are down lower, but this would shade them, and they wouldn't get as much sunshine, and they wouldn't develop as much sugar. That's not what's done in a place like Bordeaux, which grows a lot of the same varieties as Northern California, but in a much cooler climate. And they're trying to get more ripeness, more sun, more heat onto the grapes to get them to ripen earlier. So they have what we have, these knife edge little things.
Right.
So California went to that system, and and nobody's sure how much is climate change and how much is that system, but the alcohols over the last 20 years in a typical Napa wine are more than 2% higher. They went from an average of 13 or so to now an average of 15 or a little more. A huge increase in alcohol. There are now some winemakers who are experimenting with going back to the sprawl, trying to slow down sugar. There's lots of things they're trying to do, but it's tough.
Yeah. And we talked in the beginning about wines that taste good with food and wines that taste good without food. And one of the effects of wines that have these very high sugars when you pick them, very high alcohols, is they tend to be very massive wines. So they taste better on their own with their food than with food, but they also tend to stand out like in judging and in reviews and whatever. So there was a lot of kind of positive feedback about these wines because people who started making these super high sugar kind of fruit bomb, we call them, like just really intense wines, they would get great reviews because they would stand out. If you taste 15 or 20 or 100 wines in a row, if you get onto a really high alcohol, super high, what had been a high sugar wine, sometimes still a little bit of sugar in it, but it's masked by all the alcohol a little bit. suddenly it kind of wakes you up in a way that if you have wines that are going to taste a little better with food, they won't stand out as much. So it was partly experimentation. It was partly just taking French technology or ideas and moving them to a very different climate and what happened. But then like people liked them because they kind of stood out. So there was some, there's some kind of reasons that was sustained. And then what people have found more over time is that for lots of people, I don't want to say always, but like, they can tire you out, so when you're doing a big tasting, you're tasting a whole lot of things, it's kind of fun to bump into a few of those wines. But when you're sitting over dinner and just enjoying your bottle of wine with your food, those wines often, first of all, you can't drink as much because there's just more alcohol, so it limits, no matter how good of a drinker you are, you can drink less of that than something with less alcohol in it. And they tend not to enhance the food as much as some other kinds of wine. So that's partly why there's this like shifting back, I think, even you seeing in some West Coast places or some sort of New World places where people are kind of thinking like, okay, can we go back to a little bit more of the old style? But it is hard in that climate because they don't have the natural water, and it is one of the things here that's, a lot of people think of us growing in this climate as it being kind of a real disadvantage that we don't grow in a desert because we've spent so much time thinking about American wine country and what those hot, dry climates are like. But as long as we don't have hurricanes and some of the challenges we do have, some of the water we get is actually good for us. We can't have too much of a good thing, but some of it is a benefit. It's not a, oh, we can make do. We have to plan for it. We have to plant differently. We have to choose different clones and rootstocks. There's things we need to do differently than if we're in that climate, but it can be good news because it can let us get interesting flavors and interesting, really nice fruit and not have such crazy alcohols. So
great. And speaking of water, we're getting lots of comments about how much water we're getting out of the sky right now. I was driving home through Eldersburg. I almost had to pull over. It was raining so hard, and apparently there's hail in Rockville. That's not,
that's not good.
Yeah, we don't
you
want.
You can keep it in Rockville.
Keep
don't
it
let it go to
Rockville.
Mount Airy. Wow.
Don't let it go to Mount Airy anyway. No, thank you.
We're in Silver Spring and it hasn't started raining here, but it's gotten really dark. And in fact, if we suddenly disappear, it's because our power went out. Because our power goes out all the time. So don't worry about it. Or we were picked up by aliens.
It's the cicadas, probably.
It's the cicadas. Took us Who knows? Anyway, it's got that ominous look like it's going to start.
So a lot of those experiences, those experiments in California coincided with mostly Robert Parker and the Wine Spectator starting to review wines and coming up with a scale that kind of rewarded, as Sarah said, sort of big wines. And it's not what we want to make it. Get back to us for a minute. It's not really what we want to make at Black Ankle.
Right.
My wife will get mad at me for saying this, but
I don't know.
I find
there's a whole list of things.
It's a long list. Sorry. But I kind of find a lot of those wines boring.
I'm just more diplomatic.
She's more, she wants me to be more diplomatic. Sorry. You're all friends. I'm just gonna.
You asked.
Not all of them. There's a lot of wonderful wines from California, but a lot of basic wines that score high and do other things. I taste them and I think,
right.
I don't know. There's something missing for me there.
Yeah.
And, we can talk about our philosophy and what we're trying to do in wine, but it's something different. So, taste is individual. So mine is not.
It's fine. Fair enough.
And also to be fair, we couldn't reliably make those kind of wines anyway in Maryland. We have too much rain, not enough heat, not enough sun. Once in a while, for better or worse, we make one of these much bigger wines, but we try to blend them and tone them around and tone it down a little bit. We couldn't reliably do that anyway. So it's not our jam. So.
So there was a question, I'm just going through the comments. There was a question about from Skip, are old world wines experiencing the same escalation of alcohol due to their climate change conditions? And
great question.
Yes. I mean, in a word, yes. And we are seeing just the whole, like what can grow where and what can get ripe, just shift north all over Europe, really. So places where we're seeing grapes grown in the UK. There are vineyards for the first time ever. They are getting much riper fruit in like Burgundy and areas of France where usually
Germany.
Started
to make red wines in Germany.
Yeah, places where they would only white wines ripen earlier in the season. So to be able to ripen a red wine, you have to have more heat and longer, basically, of a year. So you're seeing red wines shifting into places that only white wines could ripen, like Germany growing red wine is because they only grew white wines. One could argue because they go best with the food. However, it may be a little chicken and egg there, where they couldn't grow the red wines because they didn't have the climate for it.
That's a great point. The Romans had
there you go.
vineyards in southern England.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Aren't we that was when the mini ice age started, right?
Yeah.
Sometime after that. So it was cold
That's
for a while.
How do we mute ourselves?
Sarah,
You muted us because we were getting bored.
I was letting someone else in, so sorry.
Yeah.
One of my friends, when our kids were little, I had this friend and she's like we had all these toddlers. She's like, if you could have a freeze button or a mute button, like which would you choose? That was always our like dealing with kids dilemma. And I think, mute button was all like, just make it stop, anyway, whatever. So back to wine from,
yeah. So Sarah mentioned contests as briefly, and that's one of the wine contests is or contests or critics
reviews, critics, right?
Because if you're a critic, you have to taste 100 wines a day, 200 wines a day to get through everything and try everything. So, and it's sort of the same at the Governor's Cup or some other contest.
Right.
It's all the same. You got to taste wine, and that's designed for the bigger, higher alcohol, more extracted sort of wine, which will stand out in that. The wine that's really balanced and has nice freshness, not only doesn't stand out, but kind of probably, if you had a big wine before it, tastes even more acidic.
Right, it loses.
Because your sweet receptors were shut down by the wine before that. And then the wine after that is going to taste better because you just balanced out your palate with that wine.
Your palate,
so
right.
It's really hard. I've judged those contests there as too. It's really hard. I judge them and I think, oh, this wine is great. And then later I taste it and I think, what was I thinking and it's really hard.
It's funny. We talked to Lucien, our winemaking consultant, about this, and he'll say, and we have done this many times where we'll get together with a bunch of people who are all wine people one way or another. And we might taste, 10 wines or taste through a bunch of wines, but then have dinner. And we'll often have like a few wines we think are standouts. And then at the end of the night, he'll be like, look which bottles are empty, and it's often not the ones that you thought of as your favorite when you went through and tasted wine. But once you're eating your meal and you're drinking, like, I just want a little more of that one. I want a little more of that one. And next thing you know, the ones that didn't stand out as much in the big tasting are going so much better with your dinner that those bottles end up empty at the end of the night. Sometimes all of the bottles end up empty. You have to do this exercise early enough in the evening when there's still something left to die. But often there are so many open that the few do remain. But it is interesting. I mean, it's so different. We do love to say, wine is the 5th food group. Back when there were 4. I know there's a food pyramid now and there's no more 4 food groups. But anyway, it's a whole new world. But I think there you go, Passeggiata. That's the first one. Anyway, that they should enhance your food. And so that's, it is one of the things. We've been talking a lot. I'm getting ahead on logistics, but in the tasting room, one of like the many kind of fallouts, I guess, of the whole COVID situation was that we didn't do tastings for a long time. And what we're finding is that actually we so much prefer that people are doing flights and drinking the wine slowly and eating food with them and really trying the wines in much more slowly and mixed with food and back and forth. And you're just getting a much better sample of what does the wine really taste like versus like a little sip and then the next one and a little sip. Not that you can't get some idea from a little sip, but we're kind of loving that idea of just being able to really show the wines in a much more kind of thorough way, I guess.
That's great. So a couple of things. We started talking about. I started by saying, New World, Old World isn't the perfect way to make this distinction. We had we bought a bottle of, I have it somewhere around, an old world,
Oh, I know
old
what
vine Grenache from Spain. So Spain has lots of this old tiny little vines that are head pruned, and they're about this tall, and they just bush out, and there's no trellis at all, and the grapes come down, and they're like 80 years old, and there's nothing else growing in the vineyard because it's just desert and the sun beats down all day, and they can make some really good wines. So yeah, here it is. What is it called?
Breca.
Breca.
It kind of has a cool
Yeah,
label too.
it's
I don't know.
Very
anyway.
cool label. Yeah. So I said, oh, an old vine Grenache. So let's try this. And so fair enough, Grenache is known as a high alcohol variety. It creates a lot of alcohol, but wow, this had so much alcohol. I could barely drink it.
Yeah,
It's
rated 15.5, but it's probably higher.
Yeah, it says 15 and a half on the label, which means it can be anywhere between 14 and a half and 16 and a half. And it certainly wasn't 14 and a half. So, yeah, it was clearly trying. I think they left this to ripen and ripen and ripen, trying to be a New World wine, hoping they could sell it in the US.
Which they did.
Which they did. They sold it to me. So
there you go.
But yeah, it's not limited. It's a style thing, and I just have so much. As Sarah knows, I'm a bit of a lightweight when it comes to drinking. I can't drink that much wine, so to me, that a high alcohol wine is just a lose because I get to drink less.
Yeah,
I have
that's
an
true.
alcohol cap. So what I love, what someday I would love if we can figure out how to make a beautiful 9% alcohol white wine where you could like sit down and like just like that was just the best. But anyway,
That's it. We digress. Well,
we
no,
digress.
we're working on it. Come
Next
on,
month's
whatever.
topic.
Right, exactly.
But I love those. So yeah, so that for me, I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Old these probably 80-year-old vines, and yeah, and it's a wine. It's a decision about picking. We struggle a lot with when to pick, and so do pretty much every wine grower out there. There's no formula.
Right.
You just have to taste it. You have to try to imagine what you're trying to create. And this one was, yeah, I would have liked to picked a little earlier. We went to Napa, was it 3 years ago?
3 years ago, I think. Yeah.
Sarah,
yeah.
Melissa, and we went to a winery there that was, we went to visit them because they said they were trying to get back to the old Napa style from the 1980s and early 90s. And so we said, oh, this is great. We'll go there. And we went there and we talked to them, and they said the major thing they're doing is trying to pick earlier.
Mhm.
They're just picking much earlier than everybody else when they know the alcohol is going to be lower. Unfortunately, to me, some of those wines were not ripe. They were kind of green and astringent,
sharp,
and
right.
yeah, tell the grapes weren't ripe. The sugar was there, but the grapes weren't ripe, which is not a great thing either. So, there are a lot of wineries now that there are technologies where you can run the wine through an ultra filter or a reverse osmosis machine and pull alcohol out. So there's some who are actually making 15% alcohol wines and then reverse osmosis pulling them back to 13.5. You don't know which wines those are. It's hard to know if that's good or bad or whatever, but they're going to big extremes trying to experiment anyway with it.
Right, with that. So onto our questions. So there's one about winemaking restrictions in old versus new world.
Oh yeah,
which could be a whole topic unto itself.
We talked about the vineyard. We didn't talk about the winery.
The winery. And well, the other question was like, are there differences in winemaking? And yes, I think maybe we should start with winemaking.
Let's start with winemaking. So
yeah, you can go.
I want to tell my favorite winemaking story about California.
Okay. Is it going to be twice new barrels? 200% new wood? Oh, that's
not. You'll have your favorite. That's your favorite story. No, in California, it is or at least in Napa.
Right.
I'll just say that it is illegal to add sugar to a wine. And what sugar does, if you add sugar to a wine, the yeast just turn into alcohol. So it's just a cheaper way of adding alcohol. So if you have a wine that is naturally going to be 10% and you want it to be 12, you can add a little bit of sugar and it will get to 12 and it will still taste like just the wine because all you've done is added alcohol, which has no real taste. But it's not only legal, but common to add acid to a wine. It's almost always tartaric acid, but it could be malic or it could be
Citric acid even
other
sometimes, yeah.
acids. But you can add acid to the wine because you have to wait so long for the grapes to get ripe, and it's so hot that the acidity burns away, and you get these sort of flat, boring wines. So almost all New World wines have added acids. You can buy tartaric acid and just add it. In France, it is illegal to add tartaric or any kind of acid to wine, but it is perfectly legal to add sugar, which is hilarious because
in either place you would never need one.
France, you never need acid, but you sometimes you need sugar. And in California, you always need acid. You never need sugar, and they've just outlawed the other one, and it's kind of funny. So it gives you an insight into how different it is trying to make wines in those places.
Yeah. And then there is, I think, a tendency in these newer wines, this is what I was talking about, the barrels, is to use have a much bigger barrel impact too. And I think you see that with these super high alcohol, super sugary wines. And one of the things that I saw, I can't remember where it was now, but somebody said they used 200% new wooden barrels. And I thought, well, wow, I've never thought of being able to do 200% something. But what they did was they took the wine, they did the fermentation, they barreled it in 100% new wood. And then after, I think, 6 months, they took it and they put it in another set of new wood barrels, which is like, just because they wanted so much oakiness into this wine to try to balance out all this other stuff going on. So that was definitely like a West Coast kind of California move. I don't know what they sold that wine for because that is an expensive move too, but it was just kind of crazy. So again, there is definitely stuff that happens in the winery. Some of it is also just levels of extraction, how warm you would ferment, the hotter you ferment, bigger extraction you're going to get. Much more likely if you have a very high alcohol wine that you're going to do that. You get to high enough sugar levels and you start to be limited in what kinds of yeast you can use. You're going to have to use commercial yeast because yeast will die at a high enough alcohol level. So if you get much above 15% alcohol, you'll kill all your yeast. So you have to find specialized yeast. So again, that's a choice that you're going to see much more on kind of New World style wines. Not that you would know tasting it, whether it was, commercial yeast or natural yeast, but it just means you don't have a choice not to do that if you don't want to. So those are kind of some winery.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the other common thing in those hot wine regions is you pick grapes that you think are going to be 16% alcohol, and you add water.
Yeah, that's true.
That's something that's never done in the old world because you never want to add water there. And same with Black Ankle. If anything, we struggle to get more concentration in the wines,
right,
rather than less. Out in Napa, it's very common you have so much concentration, and the wine's going to be so alcoholic that if you literally just pump water in, you can bring your alcohol from 16 to 14. And you've lost some concentration, but you have so much anyway that
you're okay. Yeah.
And you have more wine. So that's a
thing.
I guess.
Can be done.
Can be done.
It's been done. Right. Yeah. So. Yeah. So rules. Well, France, we've talked a lot about France and the wine rules in France. And I don't know as much about Germany and Austria. I mean, I think there are pretty strict rules. I just don't know them as well. The French wine regions that are named, so Burgundy or Bordeaux or even Rhone, Alsace, all those places where they have like the appellation on the label. If you're going to use the appellation, there are incredibly strict rules you must follow. And that from everything to how many vines you can plant you must plant in an acre or a hectare, how close they can be together, how much yield you can have, what the first date of harvest can be, what the last date of harvest must be. What else? What you're right. Did I think of anything else you could control? Well, certainly what grapes you can plant. I mean, there's absolute restrictions on it. You're not even allowed to have something in the ground if it's not one of the official grapes. You can't.
Yeah. How many buds are left on the vine?
Yes. How many buds? Right. It's extremely regulated.
Not that everyone follows those rules, but they're.
Yeah. But for the most part, yes. And especially in the kind of, named growths and the kind of there's a whole series of what the cru are and what the different, like if you're going to use if you're
Yeah.
going to use Bordeaux, if you're going to use Burgundy, if you're going to use the name of your village, then they're pretty strict about a lot of that. That is a much more old world thing, I think. I mean, we don't have any rules about what we plant, how densely we plant it, when we pick, what kind of yields we try to get. There's pretty much nothing. I mean, there's, you know,
we are
there's
allowed to
almost nothing.
experiment.
We could do almost anything we want. Yeah.
In another example of craziness outside of France, in Chianti in Italy,
Oh, yeah.
Their most famous wine region, there's a committee. And if you want to label your wine, if you're in Chianti and your land is considered Chianti, and you can grow wine there, but you need to submit your bottle of wine, your sample of wine to the committee. And if they don't think it tastes like Chianti, you can't put Chianti on your label.
Right. There's not a lot of like experimenting and growing and changing.
It's a little crazy. We're one of the many things we're thankful for is we get to experiment and we get to try things and we get to screw up and learn from it. And that's awesome.
Right. Mix things in different ways. And that's why you'll see we'll make a wine once, then we'll make it again. And it sometimes because we don't ever bottle it if we don't like it. But sometimes it's just because this combination worked and we don't have it again another year. Like there's none of that in these other places. And I think it is one of the reasons that Lucien keeps coming back because it's fun for him. I mean, he's in Bordeaux, he's in these named growths, he's got these very strict rules he has to follow. And he comes here and he's like, you want to put a little Pinot Noir in the Cab Sauv? Let's do it. Like he can do anything. And we make these kind of crazy blends sometimes. And, it's more fun to get to play with the whole toolbox or whatever else, even grow different things that you couldn't grow otherwise. So,
and to bring it back to us again, to be thankful to all you wonderful customers out there that allow us. We try to make the kind of wines we want to make, and we have been able to do that because you all have been so awesome about buying our wines,
liking them also.
And liking them also. That's a luxury that many winemakers don't. I talk to people in California or wherever, and they say, "Look, I need to make a wine that gets 94 from a critics or I can't sell it." So,
right.
Yeah, I don't particularly like that style, but that's what I make. I know winemakers in Maryland who've won the Governor's Cup who say, I say, you won the Governor's Cup, congratulations. And they say, yeah, I don't really like that wine, but I had to do it for publicity reasons, make something that would do well in the Governor's Cup. So we are so blessed that we don't have to any of those external things. We can say, yes, we want a wine that does beautifully on the dinner table, puts a smile on the face, tastes better at home than it did when you're at Black Ankle. That's the kind of wine we want to try to make. And we get to do that. Thank you. So
there you go.
That's great.
I missed all of these.
Cheers. Yes.
Cheers. Yeah. Cheers.
Debbie,
I know. Cheers to you guys.
Do we miss other questions? No.
Rick CV, money. Who made those rules? Okay, I'm trying to see what those rules all mean. All right. So we're almost down to logistics, I think. But let's see. Other things. Oh, vineyard update. How is bottling going? Zoe, it's a good thing you're through the screen. So for those of you who've been following from home, we bought a bottling line. It's been a long, drawn out adventure. We're getting there. We are getting there very slowly. If you could see the future, you wouldn't always make the same decisions you'd made in the past.
Can I tell yesterday's crazy story?
You can tell yesterday's crazy story.
We buy this fancy bottling. This bottling line costs tons of money when it was bought 20 years ago. It's old. It's old. But the filler corker is this beautiful thing made in Italy. It's really good. One of the things it comes with is a vacuum pump, whose job is to vacuum out the air in the neck of the bottle. So after it's filled, so that then you put the cork in when there's a vacuum in there, you put the cork in. Otherwise, if there's air or nitrogen or anything in that space, when you put the cork in, that just compresses that. And now you have compressed air, which wants to push the cork back out.
Especially if it gets warm and the wine starts to expand, right?
So it's sort of not everyone does it, but it's sort of standard in the wine world to try to pull a vacuum in the neck before you insert the cork. So these machines do that. And so this thing gets here after all the crazy whatever. We finally get it. We go to set it up. We have the people out who made it to come out and help us figure it out. And there's no vacuum pump.
You're like, oh, you're missing this big thing. You must have this
Okay.
complicated piece it's in the book. It ought to be there. Where is it?
Can we go buy one? Like, no, it's kind of specially
Into the
made for this, and
line,
it
yeah.
vacuums through a bunch of water, and it's got this tank on it. It's a complicated thing. So we call up the winery, unnamed winery in California, from whom we bought this thing, who makes very famous and
Very
not
expensive,
cheap
very fancy wine, right?
which I kind of like. You know?
Yeah.
And they tell us that, oh yeah, we never had that vacuum pump. They got it from another winery. It never had the vacuum pump. We just hooked up a shop vac to it.
Which I'm like, okay, I've got a shop vac. How do I do it? But anyway, I haven't figured
Have to
it
be
out
kidding
yet.
me.
I know.
we were both looking
like-
shock on our faces when they
I
told
know,
us
it's
that.
funny.
We're like,
I was on the phone with the guy, and Ed comes downstairs. He's like, "Did I overhear what I thought I overheard? Because what?" And I was like, "Yes, I think you did. They just got the shop back, and somehow." So anyway, we'll see. Anyway, so it's been an adventure. It's an ongoing adventure.
Yeah.
We have bought a lot of things by hand, which is slow going, and hence all the ones with no labels, no capsules. The details are, forthcoming. A straw. Yes, exactly.
I'm not sure you were on that
Um,
email chain, so I may be
I don't
freaking
know.
Sarah up by saying this. We got a quote from the company today of to replace that vacuum pump.
Oh, I didn't see it.
$15,000 to replace the vacuum pump.
Yeah.
So we
So
made
the shop
the
vac
shop
is
vac
looking better and better. Oh my god, that's crazy.
we,
For this one little missing part, they're like, it should be here somewhere, but we don't know where it is.
it's got to be the most gold plated
Oh my god,
vacuum
that is
pump.
crazy.
So
That
there
is
you go.
crazy.
So yeah, we're fighting it, but this week I think we hope this upcoming week we are going to be bottling the last 2,000 cases of our wine that we've not
Yeah.
bottled yet, and
It's really 2,600 because I forgot the filter are. But anyway, yeah, we're getting there.
oh, it's 2,600. Okay,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
that's even better.
Yeah,
We have more
yeah,
wine.
that's good. That's good.
The good news is those wines are really good.
I know they've been in tank, and so we have
Oh
to
my
keep
gosh.
checking on them to make sure that they're not going bad. And they
So,
are going to be good.
they will
19
eventually
was a good year.
they will
It's
eventually
good,
get it.
Yeah. Yeah, we will get
and-
them in the bottle.
And quick vineyard update. Vineyard looks fabulous right now. The
Good.
Chardonnay.
I'm going to get your Scotch shop back. Bring it over.
Chardonnay's in full bloom.
That's great,
Cabernet
yeah.
Franc, Albarino are 3/4 of the way through. Some of the later varieties are starting. Gruner's just starting. Cabernet Sauvignon is still going to be a week or 10 days away because it's always late, but that's normal. It looks as good as it can look this time of year, and
Yeah.
it's early, so this is always when it looks good, but it looks great. And the new planting at Live Edge looks fabulous.
It's
It
beautiful,
is
and
the
it's
best
nice.
new planting we've ever had. The vines just look really happy, and for lots of reasons, we've kind of figured out how we want to plant them and
Right.
where and what way, and it seems to be working. So
That's good. That's good.
all good news.
Cicadas. So we do not have any cicadas out there. Is anybody missing? I can get you one from my yard. If you haven't seen them, I will show you a cicada because we have plenty in Silver Spring where we actually live. But I saw one at Live
Really?
Edge. We saw one.
Yeah, I saw a whole bunch yesterday in the woods,
Oh yeah.
and
yeah,
you
yeah.
can hear them at Black
You can
Ankle.
hear 'em.
You can hear them at all,
But
but
I haven't seen
in
any
the
at Black
fields-
Ankle.
in the
no.
fields you don't see them at all.
So they're just not an issue for us. And I did when the last 17 years ago was when we planted our second batch of vines, whatever, 2004. And I remember being very worried about it and then reading and whatever. And I guess apparently they like suburban areas better than real farmland or heavy forest. They live on tree roots. And so they they're shrub roots more than tree roots even apparently. So I think we tend to see them more in kind of neighborhoods and stuff, even than out in the farms. And I thought maybe because we had these vines that they would be kind of like a shrub. They might have grown, filled in, but maybe because they weren't there before, but we haven't really seen any. So it's not an issue for us either vine wise or sitting outside on the patio wise. So yeah, it's looking good out there. And we're getting close. I think it's supposed to be like May 15th to June 15th is kind of the window that I remember. And they came out here, at least there were like a few in earlier May. And then on May 15th, it was like zillions came out.
Yeah.
And they've been at it ever since.
It looks like skeleton mulch. It's really
It's
kind of crazy. Okay. Anyway.
All right, enough of it. So the cicadas are nothing to worry about. The vineyard looks good. Live Edge looks good. Coming along slowly.
Yeah.
We keep pushing farther and farther out the opening date for Live Edge, but we'll see. It just depends on the vines and what happens and other
Yeah,
things.
we-
But
we'll
we
see
are
how hard
working
this
on it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're working on it.
We're working on it. Logistics. Happy Pride Month. I would like to say that all the rainbow umbrellas at Black Ankle were because we are so clever and planned ahead and had it all set up for that. It is just good luck. But anyway, I'm owning it as our, they'll probably only last through June at the rate they're going. So like,
They're an experiment.
they're an experiment. We're trying to get there. We're trying to fill in the little gaps in the shade. If you haven't been out there, I think there's some Instagram posts or whatever. But we have these big, beautiful triangles that have these little gaps of shade, bad gaps of sun between them, which was kind of fine last year when it was COVID times and everyone needed to spread out and you could just have your own little shade island. But now we're trying to, plus the shade shifts throughout the day, which is not ideal. Anyway, we're working on it. Experiment 1 is still in the works. I'm convinced we're going to figure it out.
By experiment 4, we'll have it down.
There are some skeptics among us, and there have been many broken umbrellas. So the skeptics are winning so far, but we're gonna.
It's gonna work.
It's gonna work. We just have to figure it out anyway. So that is what's going on there.
All right.
Reservations. I think we've talked about a lot. We're buttoning down our reservation system where you can pick which area you're in. And as always, aside from being a convenience, the reservation, it is a great chance if you have anything in particular you want us to know before you come. So if it's a special occasion or if someone has an allergy or if you want to surprise somebody with something, like add all that to your reservation and we will do our best to make it happen. And we're pretty good. I'd say we hit not 100%, but 95 more. We do pretty well on we do read them and we almost always get them straight. We certainly try. And you can remind us when you get there if we didn't appear with it. Let's see. We are open every day and the weekdays are nice and quiet still. They're picking up a little bit as the weather's nice, but if you have the flexibility to come Monday through Thursday, you really can get your choice of where to go and all that. And then Fridays, we're back to doing, Friday evenings with music and almost always a food truck. Once in a while, there's a scheduling issue, but we have them all booked. It's just if somebody has to bail out once in a while. And then Saturdays and Sundays, 10 to 6. Second Saturday is not next week, but the week after, I guess. So there is that. This week is Blues Pizza. I don't know anything about Blues Pizza. I haven't tried it. Any reviews from you guys? Have had it? I guess. I'm sure somebody ate it before we got it, so that's good.
Excellent.
And Dave Huber is there. I know he's kind of a favorite. And then second Saturday, which is next weekend, is Trippy Tacos and Ken Gutberlet. How did I say his name anyway? I don't know. But he's another guy who's coming. I know the name. He comes a lot. He's pretty fun. So that is good. Next week's happy hour before our summer hiatus. We're going to do July because I don't leave till the next day. Or 2 days later.
Yeah,
So the plan is to go ahead and do the first weekend in July before I skydive to the lake. Is 3 Albarino's. So we have 3 Albarino's this year. We split up the Albarino into 3 different blocks when we were blending it. So I see Skip's already got one, right? Look at that. He's got the I don't know which one it was, but so we're going to talk about all 3 and see. And the Albarino Norte, which is if you're sitting at the tasting room, the block all the way, like if you have the vines all the way to your right, way, if you're looking out at the farm, way at the top of that hill, that's what's released now. But we're going to have a special sneak preview of the other 2 blocks sometime in the next month, I guess. So we could do a little flight and discussion about what's different and how much is terroir versus how they face versus age of vines and all that kind of thing. That's the plan for next week. I think.
Fun.
Did I miss anything? I think that covers our whole plan. So
that's it.
We're getting there. 6:25. We've covered our hour.
Fantastic.
Anyway, well, thanks again to everybody for sticking with us out here. The lightning is flashing and we're like, I'm glad the power lasted because it's looking questionable out there. So I'm glad we made it through. Anyway,
great.
So everybody take care. And I hope we'll see you guys all out at the farm before too long.
Right.
It's great to
Thanks
see
again.
everybody.
Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, I know. Thanks for all the signing. That's great. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.